All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. So, thank you for joining the series. This event is on changes to the ACT and SAT. Not sure if any of you guys have been keeping track of these major changes um, to both tests. The SAT, which has actually been already implemented, but the ACT is set to roll out this spring. And so this will affect your child or your students, or if there are any students on this call, if there's might just be parents, will affect your, how like which tests might be best and how you should study. So I'll start off if just with a brief introduction, just for those who know me or don't know me. And then I'll go into the ACT and SAT, just break down some jargon to get started, and then I'll go into the changes into for both tests, and then at the end, just talk about suggestions on choosing the best test for your child. And we'll also have a Q&A, and if you stay until the end, I'll be raffling off one free test prep session, which is a value at $75. So a little bit about me. My name is Angelica Harris, and I'm actually the founder and CEO of Top Tutors for Us. So I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I was like probably most of your kids. I was very active in extracurriculars. I played a lot of sports, did a lot of clubs. I was also a great student. But when it came time to take the ACT, I scored a 16 in my 11th grade year. So I was just really confused on how could I be, a straight A student, but, have this a 16 on my test, like it just didn't match up. And I then began to dig further and realize that across my class, the black girls in my class we all scored in the teens, and the girls who non-black, they were scoring in the upper 20s. So um that really opened my eyes to the racial disparity in this test, and the biases in these tests that I just didn't know about, and wish I did back then. So anyway, I enrolled in a really big brand, test prep company, and didn't see any results. And I then went on my own and built my own test prep program. And what I began to realize was I actually had education gaps, and I needed to go back to learning the fundamentals, so the fundamentals of algebra and English. And so from building up my academic skills, I then was able to increase my score along the way. And so I did that for the school year, and actually got my score to a 32. And that came with over $1 million in college scholarships. So when people ask, is this test important? Does it translate to scholarships? Yes, it does. And I think I'm just a walking proof of that. So anyway, I went to WashU in St. Louis. I was always, I began doing teaching test prep, ACTs and SATs to a lot of high school students, um, and did that for undergrad and grad school. Um, I was a business and engineering student, and yeah, my students were having so much improvement that that inspired me to launch Top Tutors for Us. So, Top Tutors for Us, the goal of it is to give Black students actually a disadvantage, because I believe we're at a disadvantage in the college admissions process. So did you know in 2023, less than 3% of Black students actually hit the ACT college and career readiness benchmark, which is a 21, on all four sections of the test? So we're missing out on millions of dollars in college scholarships because we're not getting those scores. And research also shows that the National Bureau of Economic Research shows that when Black students have one or more Black teachers, their graduation rates increase by over 32%. But it's really hard to find excellent Black tutors and teachers in the market. So essentially, this platform that I founded is to work to solve that problem. Our mission is to work to help close the racial standardized testing gap. So we connect Black high school students to Black college tutors at these top institutions and provide them with a holistic academic skill building lesson plan. And they take assessments through our program, and to help them increase their test scores. So anyway, but yeah, this is just a snapshot of just the matching process. Going through this just in case for those who just don't know anything about us. So we connect, for example, let's say we take student Sam, who's an 11th grader. He loves basketball, plays on the JV team. He aspires to go to college, but he has a 17 on his ACT. We connect him to a tutor like Toby, who's at Howard, engineering major, also shares a passion for basketball and scored a 27 on the ACT. So Toby is not just a tutor, but a mentor to Sam. And he's given a personalized lesson plan um, to go throughout the duration of our program. And our program is 60 hours. It's a 60-hour course. So this is just some snapshots of kind of what I discuss. So students will take an assessment to start off with. They'll get matched with a culturally competent tutor, and they'll get onboarded into our tutoring platform. And yeah, we have actually over 175 tutors on our platform from schools like Harvard to Howard. All our tutors must have scored a 27 or higher on their ACTs. And must have past teaching and leadership experience to be eligible. And we just really appreciate our supporters and our partners. We've really gained some. We work with public school districts and also just gained a partnership with Louisiana. So as an approved provider, so we're able to reach now more students and schools, especially schools that are located in disadvantaged communities. And yeah, we've gained accolades along the way, but not too much to talk about myself, now to talk about why you guys are here. So to learn about the differences between these ACTs and SAT changes and um, what you should know and how best to prepare your child. Um, these ACTs and SATs have gotten increasingly important. And I'll kind of go into some details as to why, even for colleges that are test optional. So first, I like to begin with a poll. Um, okay, let's see. Question number 1. So just want to know which tests are you planning to take? Just want to know who's in the room. Do you have our ACTs or SAT takers? Or if you're unsure, just click option 3. Okay, I see someone who messaged both. Okay, I should have had an option for that. I didn't think. Um, very nice. All right, well, I'll go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like it's, evenly split, which is great. So, so just to kind of start off breaking down the ACTs and SATs, does anyone know like why the ACTs and SATs came about? Like, why were they created? And you can feel free to unmute yourself.
Unfortunately, I don't.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, well, so the ACTs and SATs, did you know that they were actually created almost 100 years ago? And the idea of it was to standardize the college admissions process. So when a college admissions officer is going through these thousands of applications, every student is different. They're coming from different schools, different backgrounds, um, and schools are just different. They're graded differently. Courses are at some schools are offered at some schools. In some schools, they don't have those options. So the standardized tests, the idea was to have a mechanism that all students will take, high school students will take, that they can be evaluated on the same metric. So, and that's why, yeah, they were launched, and obviously the federal government's pushed it into and made it mandatory in many states. But it has received a lot of pushback, um, because it's been research has shown for these tests to be biased, racially biased, and also biased against students who come from low income backgrounds. But um, that's kind of discussion for a different day. But regardless, it's important for students to take it. And actually, I put a picture of Sal Khan, who's the founder of Khan Academy. um, he actually argues that testing is good, and that especially the rollback of a lot of schools that have gone test optional is a bad thing. There are arguments for both sides, but he thinks it actually helps low income students because wealthy students and students from affluent schools can take their schools typically offer APs, and um, they have counselors who can write great recommendations, whereas students from lower income backgrounds, or from schools with less resources, might not have all those options. So just when a college ed officer is comparing those two applications, that student with more resource school will have an advantage. So um, but the key is that these students will have equal access to test prep, and so his platform is actually, um, that's his goal. Who offers now a section of test prep through his platform. But anyway, ACTs and SATs, I'll briefly go through these. They're used for evaluating college readiness. So the ACTs, they're graded from a 1 to a 36. So um, more selective schools, they want their students to have in that topper tier bucket of, a 33 or higher. But look at the SATs, 1600 is the highest score. So those top tier schools want 1500 or higher. I'm talking about really, really top schools like the Ivies. But anyway, these tests are also used for merit based scholarships. And I included this slide because I think there's a misconception that, students think, okay, if I'm applying to a test optional school, I don't need to take the test, or I don't need to submit a test score. It's just not important. But it actually is really important, because many of these schools actually have merit-based scholarships, and there's a minimum test score required. So like I said, I'm from Louisiana, and TOPS is the state scholarship. I know different states have different names for it. And so the minimum amount to qualify for TOPS is a 21. Oh, sorry, it's a 20. They actually dropped it a point. So it's a 20. Um, and yeah, and there's just merit-based scholarships look, for the school, and then also outside scholarship. It just looks a ton better when a student has a higher test score. But anyway, these are just to show some merit-based scholarships in some sample schools. So like TCU, for example, or let's say SLU, when a student has a 23, they qualify for 18,000 per year. That's per year, by the way. So that's nearly $80,000, which is a nice amount of pocket change. Next, these tests are used for evaluating, for placing students in different classes. So this is important for college classes. So like a student could skip some of these remedial courses and get into their actual major courses if they have, hit a benchmark um, on their, you know, achieve an appropriate test score. And so that can definitely help save a lot of money where you don't have to pay for some classes, and we actually could skip those classes. And states require testing for graduation, like Louisiana, definitely requires it. And so all 11th graders have to take it March of their 11th grade year. And the last thing I want to mention about the ACTs and SATs and like what they're used for. So I want to include this macro event. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court last, a couple summers ago did overturn race-based affirmative action. So it actually did put more weight on the standardized tests. So that means college admissions officers can't consider race at all when evaluating students' applications. Now, actually, what we've seen this year, we have not seen a big drop in Black student enrollment at these selective colleges, which is a great thing. So, but just want to throw that out there. And actually, I have another slide on this, but um, and I'll kind of bring this point up when I'm talking about the differences of the changes for the ACTs and SATs. Um, that these college and career readiness benchmarks, this especially students that are trying to go to technical schools, these test scores, especially these math and science scores, they'll get a STEM score from the ACT and SAT. That's really important, and just will give a student a leg up if they're able to score really high on those STEM portions of the test. Because as we know, like especially those highly technical schools, or like if you're applying for those engineering programs, those universities actually have a very have fewer slots than like the liberal arts programs. So it's just really competitive, and having a really high test score can really make a student stand out. Um, okay. Now, if you actually feel free, if you have any questions to unmute yourself based on kind of some things I talked about. Because now I'm getting into the second portion of the slides. I just don't want you to forget your question if you have one now.
You already touched on it, but I'm hearing a lot, like you've already mentioned. I thought that most schools now were test optional, but you've covered why, even if you applied to a school that's test optional, why you should do this. So I was just talking to some parents the other night, and they were just like, "Well, it's all test. Most schools are test optional now, so we're not, we're gonna go that route." But I see now why you shouldn't. I guess that really wasn't a question, but
Mhm.
I don't know that the information is out there like this.
Yeah, it depends. So some student like if a student doesn't really like if their score is not let's say
It's about like yours.
complimenting, or if it, oh sorry.
Their score, they already had a junior take the test, and their score was about like your first score, like a
Mhm.
16. Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, if they just like if they're applying to like a really selective college, or if their score is just like if it's not above the school's average, then yeah, it's probably not the best idea to submit it. However, what we've seen for low income students is that those students who submit strong test scores, they get more scholarship money. So these students might get into the school, but they're not getting merit-based scholarships, or just getting way less. So, um, actually, we work with a nonprofit currently, and all their students need financial aid, and they're all taking the test, and we're prepping them. So, um, those students can qualify for those merit-based scholarships. Um, but my second point I want to say about that is some schools have gone to requiring the test. I mean, these are like definitely more of your selective schools like Harvard and the MITs, um, and then plus the last thing I want to mention is college has gotten way more competitive. Like there are more applications now than ever, and if you have a strong test score, um, it definitely gives a student a leg up if like an admissions officer is looking at all these students with you know perfect GPAs, and then a student has a really strong test score to complement their application. It just gives them that leg up in that competitive pool. So that's a great question. Um, does anyone else have any questions? Alrighty. Well, changes to the ACT. Um, so you probably know, like the ACT, they're kind of going back and forth. Like, the SAT made a ton of changes, and the ACT is responding with a ton of changes, and it kinda makes sense, like, these big test makers, I mean, we do live in a capitalist society, so, like, they are the more students that take their tests, the more money they make. So, what they don't wanna see is, like, the ACT is, like, definitely the most popular test, and the SAT, they make their tests a lot shorter, like, now it's about 2 hours, and the ACT is, like, 4 hours. So, a lot of students are moving over to the SAT, but, the ACT, that's kinda hurting their pocketbooks. So, they responded with a bunch of changes, and one of their changes they're making is they're shortening the test. So, there are gonna be 44 fewer questions. The new English section is roughly it was 75 questions before. They're reducing it by 25 questions. And so it's going to be 50 questions total for the section. The math section is reducing by 15 questions, going from 60 to 45 questions. The reading is reducing just by 4 from um 40 questions to 36. And so, strategically, if you're a student that's really strong in the humanities, like, reading and writing, English, the ACT is a really good fit for you because before the ACT, like, the English and reading portion would be worth 50% of the test, but now it's worth over 66. Your score is worth over on the ELA sections worth over 66%. So, you really can showcase your strength in that area. And the science section is now optional. Um, so in terms of particularly this section, um, this sections is like it's been pretty controversial because it's not really a science section where like a student needs to know like a lot of chemistry, physics, biology. It's really like a data analytics test. So, like, how well can the student interpret graphs and charts really quickly? And so the timing for the test they're actually increasing the time for the test, like the amount of time you have from just 35 minutes to 40 minutes. Um, and so my recommendation is if you're a student applying to STEM program, especially if it's a competitive program, I would prep for the science section and take it so that you can get a STEM score. So for those who don't know about the ACT, when you get your score back, you'll get a score for each section, and then they will average your math and science score and give you a STEM score, and they'll average your English and reading, and also your like writing is optional. But if you take that, they'll give you an ELA score. So if you're like say if you're going to the STEM, especially competitive STEM programs, I would recommend doing the science. So, you know, just colleges can just, that can complement your STEM background and make your application stand out. Now, in terms of the format for the tests, they're making this math portion where reducing the amount of options from 5 to 4. So that increases your likelihood of getting the problems right. And they're also shorting the reading passages. Typically, the reading passages were like, if you ever taken the ACT, it's like it was pretty long. It'll be like a page and a half, but now they're making it much shorter. Um, and like asking more main idea questions. Um, and then for English portion, they're uh reducing the amount of like going back and forth. So typically the ACT would have students they'll ask a question about like a previous paragraph or multiple paragraphs, and students will have to do a lot of going back and forth. But now they're making those questions just based on a shorter portion of the passage. And then I want to mention that the ACT is offering both an online and a paper version of the test. So Um, yeah, so you can choose that option of whether you want to go paper or pencil. Some kids perform better on either or. Now, one of these changes taking in going into effect. So this spring, starting in the April 2025, you'll see this new version of the test. So, as I mentioned, if your child is taking the ACT and they are certain about that, and they're like, they're a junior, they can probably just omit the science section, especially if they, um, you know, I would suggest like not taking the science and and just like if only if you're really if your child is really really needing a STEM score, but if they're not, just taking those 3 sections and focusing on it and getting as high a score as possible. Because at the end of the day, most scholarship, especially the big scholarship programs, they just need the composite score. So your goal is to max out on all 3 of those sections. It's just easier to focus on 3 than 4. And but this is only the April 2025 is only for the online tests. The new change will take into effect on the paper test beginning September 2025. And for anyone who's a part of any kind of state or district testing, so like, all students have to take a test with the school, those changes will roll out beginning in February 2026. So you actually have a whole nother year to prepare for those new things. Now, and feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions before I move on to the SAT changes. Okay, so the SAT, um, just a reminder, all 11th graders, they have the option to qualify for national merit-based scholarships beginning, they'll all have to take the PSAT in October of their, yeah, so if their 11th grade year, and if they score in the top 1%, then they can be eligible for um, this become a national merit scholar. And the SAT is 100% digital, so there's no option to take it on paper. So if your child is like they really prefer paper, um, they track better than just the uh, SAT might not be the best fit. And they might want to just stick with doing the ACT and be having that option to take it on paper. Now, these changes have already gone into effect, actually starting this past April. And the SAT has shortened it from the 3-hour test to now it's just around 2 hours. And they have 4 different sections. So a reading and writing portion, and then, well, 2 modules on reading and writing and 2 modules on math. So for students who are really really strong in math, actually the SAT might be a really good fit because 50% of their score is their math score. So that might give them a leg up. Now, this has been pretty controversial right here with the adaptive testing. So the SAT is adaptive. Now, does anyone know what they like when they mean about like the questions are adaptive or their testing formats adaptive? Okay, so no worries at all. Um, so this just means that when they're that the questions are based on their previous, like if they got the first question right, then their next question will be based on how well they scored before. And so students will all see different questions. It's not the typical linear test. The ACT is remaining linear, so all students are seeing the same test questions. Now, how this test works, so module 1 is linear. So all students are seeing the same questions. So students who score a 70% or higher, they get placed in they receive the hard test, the adaptive hard test for module 2. If they score below 70% accuracy on the first module, then they receive the easy test for easy adaptive test for module 2. Now, the problem that students run into if they do score lower than a 70% is that the highest score that they can receive on this reading and writing section is a 5500. Now, if they do that on both tests, then they're just maxing out at an 1100. So, for students that are really trying to get some good scores, they have to do perform well on module 1 so they can get to the hard adaptive tests. Um, yeah. And the SAT is also allowing now for students to be able to use their calculators on the entire math portion. This has changed from before when the calculator was only allowed for one portion of the test. In the SAT, they've made the reading and writing portions a lot more friendly. They're shorter passages with one question per passage and it's covering a broader range of topics. They also have an integrated graphing calculator in their system. So typically, like students who were able to get, advanced calculators, graphing calculators, they would have an advantage on the test. But now this has leveled the playing field for everyone now to have a graphing calculator. And they can, they have the advanced annotation tools. So there's a timer and flagging and all sorts of things like that. Mhm. Okay. So, should your child take the ACT or the SAT? This is really, um, I've kind of gone through just some reasons of why the ACT would be stronger, especially for ELA students. And the SAT is a better test for math students. And plus, like I mentioned before, if students prefer paper, then they should opt for the ACT. And um, yeah, so those are just some of the core reasons why to go for either or tests. Now, colleges look at both tests similarly, so there's no advantage for going for either or. Now, definitely don't try to study for both tests because that will be a lot. You just want to choose one test and study for that, um, because like I mentioned, they're worth the same amount. So, but yeah, I just want to pause right there to see if you guys have any questions. Alrighty. Well, how can top tutors assist your child? Now, obviously, this is not like some kind of advertising or marketing pitch, but just want to share resources. But it would kind of be behoove me not to share what we offer for students who are in our program. So our ACT and SAT test prep program, the entire course is 60 hours, and it is so students will receive 20 hours of one-on-one sessions with their test prep tutor, along with 20 hours of assessments. And these assessments, we are able to give the student a predicted test score. They also receive written feedback from us and a breakdown of how well they performed on important concepts. Plus, we'll have access to 20 plus unlimited access to our online content, which includes pre recorded videos, hundreds of practice questions and tests, plus access to both our top tutors ACT and SAT test prep book. Now, we do offer any student, like, don't have to be enrolled into our program, a free ACT and SAT test. So let's say your child is like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to take if the ACT is a better fit or if the SAT is a better fit. They can take a free one um, with us, and we offer our assessments are proctored by we have a live proctor on there, so and it's every Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. So it's almost like a simulation of the real test day where a student has to get up early and they have a proctor and they're in a room with other students taking their tests. So and yeah, we offer discounted rates for schools and organizations. So that pretty much I kind of got through those slides pretty quickly. But do want to leave some time for questions. Um, we have a pretty small group, so you actually this is a great opportunity to ask me any questions. Um,
So what would you suggest is the best time to take the course? So for instance, saying I'm just making this up. The best time is to take it in the summer before your junior year, so you'll be prepared to take the test. Blah. You see
mhm.
what would be the best time to take this course?
Yeah, so the best time would be in their 11th grade year. So, well, it actually, okay, it does depend if the student's trying to get the National Merit Scholarship. Like we did have some students who actually did receive National Merit Scholarships, and they started with us their sophomore year in the springtime. So they had their sophomore spring and the summer to prep for the PSAT test. So, let's say if the student's in their 11th grade year, we would recommend them starting now so that they have the spring semester and the summer to prep. We really don't recommend senior year. It's just way too hectic. And they want to like, and by that time, fall of senior year, they need to start sending their applications out to colleges.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.